And good evening. We're doing it live right here, weeknights in the 5 o'clock hour, drive time in Los Angeles. Mottek on Money 5 nights a week for you, live on the air here in 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com, and the on-demand Mottek on Money podcast at kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, all your favorite podcast platforms. Inflation taking center stage in the financial markets today. The latest reading on consumer prices coming in hotter than expected. Not a big surprise to Southern California consumers, given the dramatic rise in gas prices, among other things lately. Inflation did pick up again last month, but the market took the latest tick up as not likely enough to prompt Fed policymakers to raise benchmark short-term interest rates again next week. Stocks finished mixed, with the Dow coming in for a closing loss of 70 points. The S&P 500 gained 5.5, and the Nasdaq gained 40 points. Stock indexes closing mostly higher today following the release of that consumer price index for the month of August, showing the annual headline inflation number rose 3.7% last month, slightly higher than Wall Street analysts estimated 3.6%. The consumer price index measures costs across a wide variety of goods and services, up 0.6% for the month. And that, by the way, was the biggest monthly jump seen in more than a year, in fact, in 14 months. Now, taking out food and energy, the so-called core inflation rate rose by 0.3%, also bigger than most analysts had expected. Now, the latest readings on the economy, as well as merger and acquisition activity being actively discussed today, with some of the biggest names in the business world meeting in Beverly Hills this week at the Association for Corporate Growth Los Angeles Chapter Annual Conference. I'll talk about that this evening with Jim FREEDMAN, Managing Director and Chairman of Intrepid Investment Bankers, who will be joining us live later this hour. Joining us now to discuss today's big news on inflation and the economy. Joining us now, economist Dr. Mohamed EL-ERIAN, president of Queens College, Cambridge, chief economic advisor at Allianz, and former PIMCO CEO in Newport Beach. His latest book coming out next month is titled Permacrisis, a Plan to Fix a Fractured World. Mohamed, thank you very much for taking the call on this big day today. It's always an honor to have you with us. Take it from the top and give us your assessment of the latest news here today.
So as you say, Frank, the big news was the inflation report. It was mixed. Less comforting for most of us was the fact that headline inflation, which captures the overall consumption basket, went up and now is running at 0.6% month over month, or 3.7%. So after reaching a low of 3.1% inflation, we're now back up to 3.7. That's not good news. But there was good news, and that is if you look at what's called core inflation, which strips out the more volatile items such as food and energy, that came down. It's still above 4%, but it continues to come down. So the bad news is there's no immediate relief from inflation. The good news is that the underlying dynamic seems to be getting better.
And we're watching gas and oil prices rise, and I don't know if you've been to Southern California lately, but we have eye-popping gas prices again at our pumps here, with oil hovering around $90 a barrel in New York as well as in London. Mohamed, obviously that was a big component in this latest inflation report. What's your view on energy prices here?
So it was, and unfortunately, there is still more in the pipeline. So unfortunately, based on what we know today, we should expect gas prices to go up even more, and that's not good news. It's interesting because most people thought that the international price of oil would come down as China disappoints on the growth side, but it hasn't. It's gone up. And there's two reasons for that. One is that the U.S. economy remains dynamic, and we continue to grow, and we continue to consume a lot of oil. And then the second thing is supply. Saudi Arabia has led another production cut, and as you reduce supply, that pushes up price. I think most analysts expect that absent any major slowdown in the United States, that oil prices will remain high, which I know is not a comforting bit of news, but unfortunately that's where we are.
Given what we have today, what's your expectation on the Fed's next move? Will we see another rate hike in the face of this hotter than expected inflation reading? And what's your view on the outlook for further interest rate hikes by the Fed?
So the Fed is going to meet next week. I don't expect them to increase interest rates next week. They will implement what's called a pause. A pause is different from declaring the end of the hiking cycles. We've come a very long way. In fact, this has been one of the most concentrated hiking cycle in many decades. Why? Because the Fed fell behind on inflation and had to play catch up. So we've seen them increase interest rates by more than 5% since they started in March of 2022. I expect them to pause. There is some probability that they may hike again in November, on November 1st. Why? Because inflation is still high. I hope they don't. I hope that they wait and see what the cumulative effect of all the increases is likely to be, because the major policy risk right now is of doing too much and pushing our economy into recession. There is no reason for the U.S. to fall into recession unless we get another policy mistake.
Are you heading in that direction, Mohammed? And what is your current outlook? For a while there, it looked like a soft landing scenario was the most likely. Now they're talking possibly at least a bumpy landing here, right?
Yes, I mean, I must say the extent to which the narrative has changed over the last 14 to 15 months has been amazing. So just think, in that period alone, for the largest economy in the world, the conventional wisdom has gone from soft landing to hard landing to no landing. Then we had the banking issues in March, so the narrative became crash landing. Then we got back to hard landing. Then we got to soft landing, and now we're bumpy landing. That's an incredible evolution in a narrative, in a growth narrative for the most important and largest economy in the world, and just shows you the extent of uncertainty that exists right now.
And certainly adding to that uncertainty is what's happening in China, as you've written recently extensively, given China's disappointing economic performance this year, including its real estate sector, which has seen tremendous pressure. Remember, they were held up as a darling back during the financial crisis, what they were doing in real estate and playing a role in stabilizing the global economy at that time. What do you see happening there in China at the moment?
So China has disappointed in three ways. One is the bounce back from COVID has been much more muted than people expected. As we all know, they continued implementing restrictions, what they call the zero COVID policy, until the end of last year. And the hope had been that it would be like a spring, that the economy would bounce back in a very determined fashion. That hasn't happened. Disappointment number two is that after the immediate bounce back was behind us, the economy didn't settle at the 5% growth rate that the authorities targeted. It looks like they're growing slower than that. And then disappointment number three is that they haven't dealt decisively with some of the debt problems, including in the property sector that you mentioned. And because of these three things, their room for maneuver on policy is less than it usually is. And that's why China is looking, in my opinion, at a period of slower than expected growth. And that means that the global economy will depend even more on the U.S. as its main engine of growth.
Dr. Mohammed EL-ERIAN, let me ask you this now. Obviously, the situation, the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia, always a big factor in every discussion nowadays. What's your expectation on how this is going to play out and its ongoing impact on the global economy?
You know, the human suffering continues, and that's a real tragedy. Most people expect that this is going to evolve into a stalemate. We'll have a situation where neither side makes major gains. So in terms of additional shocks to the global economy, they are likely to be limited unless we get one of these tail events, one of these very low probability, high impact events. Those include, I don't think they're going to happen, but they include things like Russia using a nuclear weapon or China providing Russia with lethal weapons. I don't think these things are going to happen, and therefore the conflict will settle into the stalemate, and there won't be incremental impact on the global economy. That's important because once you get away from the U.S., you're not only worried about growth in China, but you're also worried about growth in Europe. And the one word that is increasingly associated with Europe these days is stagflation. That their growth slows down with Germany going into recession before inflation comes down. So they get the worst of both worlds. They get low income generation, and then the income that is generated gets eaten up by inflation. So it is important that the U.S. continue to grow because there are headwinds coming from other parts of the global economy.
We saw the banking turmoil earlier this year with several big bank failures. Has the dust settled in all of that, Mohamed? And obviously there's still a lot of nervousness, especially as it relates to banking and commercial real estate and so forth. What's your outlook here on how this continues to play out?
We need to watch it really carefully. You mentioned commercial real estate. That's the biggest example of an asset class that went too far during the extraordinary period of very low interest rates that we had and has to be refinanced. And many of the projects make a lot less sense now that interest rates are so much higher. Add to that one particular segment, office space, isn't coming back as strongly as some people would like. And this is a sector that's going to see some distressed selling. The hope is that there's enough new money on the sideline to come in and buy at a lower price, and that there is a smooth handover from banks, regional banks who own quite a bit of this, to other investors who are much more patient and have deeper pockets. That's the hope, but I tell you that's one thing that people are looking at. Now, it plays out over time, which allows the system more flexibility to adjust.
And what about on the residential side? The Fed obviously trying to hit the brakes on inflation, and in the process, we see these mortgage rates at 20-plus year highs at the moment. What do you see ahead for residential real estate?
Yeah, the big puzzle is why have prices held up at a time when the mortgage rate has gone up from, say, 3% to over 7%? Normally, we see prices come down, and there's two reasons for that, and both have to do with the supply of housing. One is there isn't enough new supply. Two, if you've got a mortgage at 3% and you're looking for another house, you will get discouraged by the fact that your new mortgage will be at 7%. So we're seeing volumes come down because people simply don't want to get a new mortgage rate that is significantly higher than where they are. So the buyers out there are facing a situation of limited supply, and that's why prices have held up much better than most people expect. If you compare us to the United Kingdom, where mortgages typically are variable or have a maturity of only 3 years, whereas we typically have 30-year maturity, there prices have come down quite a bit.
On the air with economist Dr. Mohamed EL-ERIAN, and we've had these conversation for decades here, Mohamed, and so very grateful each and every one of them. I know the audience is very grateful as well. When you're on it, it's always a big news, and you've handled so many crises, and your analysis is followed worldwide, and now you've about to release a new book, Permacrisis, a plan to fix a fractured world, which I understand will be released next month. Tell us about your new book and what the people should know about it.
Well, let me just say it's always a great pleasure and honor to be with you, so thank you for having me. This book originated from Zoom calls that we had during lockdown. So 3 of us had weekly calls talking about the world. And the three were very different. One is a very well-trained economist and Nobel Prize winner who understands growth dynamics very well, Professor Michael Spence. The other one is the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who understands policy making really well and is very committed to public policy, and that's Gordon Brown, and myself. And for over a year, we would have these calls where we would lament this feeling that we were going from one crisis to another and never seemed to regain footing before something new hit us. And we asked the question, how do we get out of this cascading crises, about these perma-crises, the sense that we're always in crisis mode when it comes to the economy? And we came up with an answer that really boils down to three things. One is finding new growth models that take advantage of productivity-enhancing innovations so that economies can grow in a high, sustainable, and inclusive manner. Second, improving domestic policy management so that we don't repeat the mistakes that have been made on the monetary policy side, on the fiscal policy side, and we coordinate better the economic approach. And three, and most difficult, is improving global policy coordination. A lot of the problems we face are global in nature, and they require collective action, and they require a sense of collective responsibility so that we can solve them. So the hope is with this book, we set out an agenda of steps that can be taken. They're incremental. There's no one big bang policy approach, but there's a series of policies that we believe are both desirable and feasible that, if implemented, can gain momentum and get us out of this feeling that we're simply on the verge of another crisis.
The book is called Perma-Crisis, A Plan to Fix a Fractured World, will be released next month, co-written by Dr. Mohamed EL-ERIAN. And this year, Mohamed, we've certainly seen the rise of AI. Is AI a component in dealing with crises of the future? And what are your thoughts on AI at this point?
So if we think of this distribution of potential outcomes, AI does two things. One is it allows us to expect, on average, better outcomes. It shifts the distribution in the right direction. Two is that it increases what are called the tails, the extremes. So it can make really good things happen, but also it can make bad things happen. So how AI is managed and implemented is going to be key. And the reason why this is so important is that this is generative AI. It is productive intelligence that can be applied so that we just don't, not just it refers to what we do, but how we do it. And you already see it being applied in certain areas that make us much more productive. And it's this combination of AI and humans that have a huge potential, but this is something that has to be managed really carefully.
One of your big fan clubs has gathered in Beverly Hills again this week, the Association for Corporate Growth, Los Angeles chapter, the big M&A group. And certainly a lot of people are talking about the economy and where things go. And people are asking each other, what's your gut feeling on the economy at this point? Let me put that question to you, Mohamed, on behalf of everybody there and on behalf of the audience. What's your gut feeling?
My gut feeling is an economy that has navigated really well lots of headwinds, higher interest rates, the slowdown of China, is in a good place. And there's no reason why we need to fall into recession. There's a lot of upside. And the one thing we have to avoid is shooting ourselves in the foot. And whether it is our Federal Reserve making yet another mistake, or we shut down the government, these are the sorts of things that can trip up this economy. But left to its own, this economy can continue to surprise on the upside, certainly relative to China and Europe, where they have not been able to navigate all these headwinds as well as we have been.
Mohamed, thank you very much for the call this evening. We greatly appreciate it and hope to speak with you again, coinciding with the actual release of the new book next month, Permacrisis, A Plan to Fix a Fractured World. Dr. Mohamed EL-ERIAN, president of Queens College, Cambridge, former PIMCO CEO in Newport Beach, chief economic advisor at Allianz. Mohamed, it's always an honor to speak with you. Thank you very much for your thorough analysis of things here this evening on Mottek on Money on 790 KBC.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Now, right out to the freeways we go here on 790 KBC. Folks, let's be honest. Sometimes we find ourselves or a loved one dealing with a massive injury caused by a terrible accident by no fault of our own. Sometimes it's simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Listen, we're good at preparing for earthquakes and fires, but let's not forget to prepare in case we're involved in a major accident. It's critical to know who to call first. Clark Fielding became an attorney to help you in a crisis. Fielding Law is focused on justice and resources for you because they understand how the system works and what to do in the most horrific situations. I always say put the Fielding Law team in your phone number under the word accident. So all you have to do is hit dial. Believe me, you'll feel better having set this up for yourself and your family. The number is 833-88-SHARK, 833-88-SHARK. With the population exploding and increased vehicles on the freeways, be proactive, prepare for the worst, and expect the best. But if and when you need help, call Clark Fielding and his team of sharks at 833-88-SHARK, 833-88-SHARK, or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Again, that's clarkthesharklaw.com.
It's just a jump to the left.
790 KBC welcomes the Rocky Horror Picture Show 48th anniversary. Can you believe it? 48th anniversary spectacular tour coming to the Saban Theater October 8th. Tickets are on sale now at AXS.com. Right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-795-2222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Call right now, 1-888-790-5222. Mottek on Money continues here on 790 KBC. Mixed finish for the stock market today on the latest readings on inflation. The Dow coming in for a closing loss of 70 points at 34,575. S&P 500 at 5.5, and the NASDAQ gained 40 points. The yield on the 10-year note now 4.25%. In the cryptos, we see Bitcoin down about $25 at 26,120, and Ethereum up 3 at 1607. Looks like Doge hanging in there at 6 cents. Shares of Starbucks closing up 69 cents to 96.93. Down about 0.5% in after-hours trading, and news that the company's CEO Howard Schultz will step down from the coffee chain's board, according to the company announcement this afternoon. We see Citigroup shares up nearly 2% after the mega bank said it would reorganize into a flatter structure, with the heads of its 5 major business units reporting directly to Chief Executive Jane Fraser. And shares of NIO, the so-called Tesla of China, moving lower by nearly 5% after the European Union said it's investigating Chinese government subsidies to electric vehicle makers. Now the latest news for you right here on 790 KBC. Innovation Refunds has been helping small businesses that qualify get a business payroll tax refund through the Employee Retention Credit, also known as the ERC. It's Frank Mottek here. The ERC is a tax refund for businesses that kept employees on payroll for parts of 2020 and the year 2021. Now, if you own a business with more than 5 employees, you could have money waiting for you. The ERC tax filing is very complex. Innovation Refunds is dedicated to helping business owners navigate that process. If your business faced challenges during the pandemic that it would not have without pandemic government orders, you may be eligible for a substantial refund. Go to innovationrefunds.com to see if you qualify. Innovation Refunds has hundreds of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot, Google, and they're accredited by the BBB. There's no upfront fee. They don't get paid unless you get paid. InnovationRefunds.com is the website, or call 1-843-REFUNDS. That's 1-843-REFUNDS. Innovation Refunds does not provide tax or legal advice. They work with an independent network of tax professionals and will share information with them to evaluate and process your claims. Terms and conditions apply. Mottek on Money continues here in 790 KBC. Big business at one of the biggest annual conferences happening in Los Angeles. That is the ACGLA conference, big mergers and acquisition conference held annually at the Beverly Hilton. A lot being discussed about the economy, including today's inflation number and, of course, M&A activity. We want to get the latest now right from the conference, and joining us live now is Jim Friedman, Managing Director and Chairman of Intrepid Investment Bankers, a giant on the L.A. business scene and most respected in the deal-making world here in the Los Angeles area. Jim Friedman, thank you very much for taking the call live with us here from the ACGLA conference. Take it from the top and tell us about the conference this year.
Well, thanks, Frank. It's great to be with you. We had about 600 or 700 deal professionals in the last few days at the Beverly Hilton. This is our 25th year of having this conference. It was populated by a bunch of private equity investors, investment bankers, attorneys, all kinds of deal professionals that sort of made this so robust. And just the fact that there was, so much activity going on, just shows that people are still interested in kind of getting together and exploring opportunities to do these kinds of transactions.
On the Air Live with Jim Friedman. And what's the mood there on the economy and business activity this year?
Well, I think it's a little mixed, Frank, to be frank with you. It seems like the deal business, the M&A business, we sort of got very spoiled, I think, in the second half of 2020, in 2021, and the first half of 2022. Those were incredible deal-making years. The last, I'd say, 12 months, things have slowed down given what's happened with the economy, which has affected deal-making. I think the interest rates, which have been unprecedented in the last 18 months, has kind of hurt a little bit. I think companies' performances have also slipped. And so while we had great traction actually during COVID for a lot of companies, I think that the global kind of world stage has sort of slowed things down a little bit. So it was clearly not as rosy as it has been the last few years.
Certainly over those 25 years, I've been honored to be with you at just about every single one of those conferences over the years. Remember, we were on the air during the Great Recession days in 2008. And, of course, we were on during the pandemic and coming out of it. And fast forward to what we're seeing here now with certainly the banking sector very much in focus this year. We did see some pretty high-profile mergers or shotgun marriages, as the case might be, in the banking sector. What is the buzz about what's happening with the banks, for example, in this environment?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think it's a tale of two cities here. You've got the major banks, over $100 billion in assets banks, and they're doing pretty well. They have not suffered much at all during this kind of period. They've actually benefited from the rising interest rates. They are very solid in terms of their capital bases. And then you've got the more regional banks, which, as you know, we've had some bank failures in the early part of this year. I think a lot of the regional banks, have been hurt by the lack of deposits. I think their exposure in commercial real estate is disproportionate to the larger banks as a percentage of what they've got. And so I think some of the smaller, more regional banks are feeling it. And I think we'll see more mergers and acquisitions having to be done in that category.
On the Air Live with Jim Friedman, chairman of Intrepid Investment Bankers. And, of course, a lot of changes here in Southern California. And anecdotally, we're hearing more businesses are leaving, Jim, and perhaps interested in selling their businesses. Are more people approaching you about doing just that these days?
Yeah, I don't think that's new. I think that's been going on the last few years as the, regulatory and tax burdens of operating in California, have sort of come into place. A lot of companies, especially manufacturing companies that are regulated, have seen their costs go up, their compliance costs go up, their taxes go up. And we have seen a lot of the more traditional companies leaving, which leaves us a lot more as a service-based economy, healthcare, technology. That seems to be where this region has been going the last year or two.
Any other big takeaways from the conference? I know you always have very prominent speakers there. It seems like yesterday you were on stage with former Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke and many illustrious speakers coming through that conference over the years.
Yeah, so this year we had two very interesting speakers. Lloyd Blankfein, the former chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs, was one of the keynotes, as well as Oscar Munoz, who was the CEO of United Airlines. I think that the takeaways from a lot of the conference, Frank, was that people are concerned about the latter part of this year and going into 2024. It seems like interest rates are not going to go down. In fact, the consensus from some of the economists speaking and some of the global strategists was that we can expect these interest rates to stay higher for longer than we thought. And as a result of that, they're predicting potentially a recession, the R word, most likely in the first half of 2024. Some are saying that it will be a softer landing. Some are saying, a harder landing. It's hard to sort of gauge it, but clearly it wasn't as upbeat in terms of 2024 as we would normally like it to be.
Well, that's very important, an important assessment you're hearing from Jim Friedman tonight, Managing Director and Chairman of Intrepid Investment Bankers, coming to us live from the ACG LA conference in Beverly Hills. Jim, thank you very much for taking the call live from the conference for that thorough update tonight, and look forward to being in touch with you, and we wish everyone there all the very best.
Great. Thank you, Frank. Always good to talk to you.
Likewise. Thank you very much. Again, Jim Friedman, Managing Director and Chairman of Intrepid Investment Bankers based in West Los Angeles. Now let's get right out to the freeways here on 790 KBC. Folks, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. QC Kinetics can change your life. You can live again without that chronic joint pain and without drugs or surgery. It's Frank Mottek here. QC Kinetics is advanced regenerative medicine. They take your body's own concentrated healing properties and put them right into your joint to restore and repair that damaged tissue that's causing all of that horrible pain. The patient satisfaction reports are absolutely astonishing. Finally, a real alternative to the old ways of dealing with pain. And unlike surgery, there's no downtime with QC Kinetics. If you have constant pain in your knees, hips, shoulders, or back, you need to call and get a free consultation from the medical professionals at QC Kinetics today. Imagine this autumn moving around pain-free, doing the things you love again, walking, hiking, playing with your grandkids, you name it. Call QC Kinetics and see how the latest advances in precision regenerative medicine can attack your pain and bring you lasting relief. Call QC Kinetics, locations in Glendale, the city of Orange, Mission Viejo, and now also in Costa Mesa. The number is 213-997-PAIN, 213-997-PAIN. Again, that's 213-997-PAIN. Mottek on Money continues here in 790 KABC. Good evening. Is catch and release about to get even worse here in the Los Angeles area in the face of a crime wave with all those smash and grab retail thefts, those flash mob robberies happening, which most have been caught on video, but unfortunately the suspects haven't been caught. Joining us live now is the former Los Angeles County District Attorney, the Honorable Steve COOLEY. Steve COOLEY, thank you very much for taking the call. I see now that there's a new set of bail schedules that are set to begin in October. We did catch a wind of this recently. I know you've had a chance to take a look at it. Tell us what this means to Mr. and Mrs. Southern California and what it could do to crime here in the Los Angeles area.
Well, it appears the latest is a new bail schedule is going to be imposed on the system, and it will effectively amount to, in most misdemeanors, an individual will be released automatically without any bail being set. This is very consistent with a number of different ideas and concepts and proposals proposed in our legislature, enacted in New York, enacted in Illinois, enacted in New Jersey, and where it has been enacted, it's generally been a failure and led to failures to appear on the part of the accused defendant. I think what these various proposals, and there's been many of them, I must say, miss is that 1275 of the Penal Code is incredibly logical in saying very simply that in setting or denying bail, a judge should consider the seriousness of the offense charged, the previous criminal record of the defendant, and the probability of his or her appearing at trial. These are simple concepts. These are logical concepts. And I think all these ways to sort of mitigate it are silly because the system already allows any individual who's been arrested a chance to get a bail deviation lower, get an OR release from a bail commissioner, make the best pitch with an attorney at their side in a bail hearing before a judge. So I don't get all this quote unquote bail reform stuff. I just don't, especially when the people voted to keep cash bail as a system overwhelmingly. Why don't we respect their judgment?
So how does this happen? So you have the situation going on with the LA County DA and now the court system loosening things as well?
Well, yes. Court system is the next step. I think that goes into effect October the 1st. A judge in a civil court basically ruled that that's the way it should operate. I don't think that hearing was really contested because our elected DA, George Gascon, did not participate. Since he's in favor of no bail as a general concept and decarceration, he didn't even appear on behalf of the people of the state of California. The sheriff was there, the LAPD chief was there, but not our DA. That's a real problem, as we all know.
Certainly. What would have been your message at that hearing, sir?
It would be that the system has historically worked. It's in the Constitution, by the way, as a system that should be in place. And there are ways to make it a very accurate system to assure the attendance in court of an accused individual. And that includes OR releases, bail deviations. Maybe if the court is or others are concerned that these decisions to set bail are not discreet enough, how about just put more resources, judicial resources, into being available to evaluate a bail deviation request, have a bail hearing, maybe spend more time on it, and then make a more discreet decision. But I'll tell you one thing, just saying, not going to be bail on all these offenses, that's arbitrary, it's capricious, it's going to bother the people who were victimized by the individual who committed the crime. They're going to lose faith in the system. So, no, that'd be how I would have handled it, but I'm not the DA. George Gascon is.
I know you supported the recall, and any update on that effort?
Yes, it's in court. The people who have worked so hard and diligently since last September evaluating the signatures that the registrar recorder had rejected feel very, very confident that when they have a trial, they will win, and a judge will set the matter for a recall. And at the present time, that would be in the primary election, first Tuesday in March of 2024. The registrar recorder had inflated the voter rolls substantially and made incredible number of egregious, obvious errors in invalidating certain signatures. And I think that the attorneys who are on it, with the help of some pro bono assistance from some other people, that they are going to prevail in court. And the registrar recorder is going to get a black eye behind this. He never thought anyone would challenge it. Well, some pretty good people decided we're going to challenge it. And good for them because they're right and he's wrong.
The Honorable Steve Cooley, thank you very much for taking the call on this important matter tonight, and look forward to getting your views as often as possible here. The former Los Angeles County District Attorney, the Honorable Steve Cooley, thank you again very much for joining us here on Mottek on Money on 790 KBC.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much. And we had a mixed finish on Wall Street today in reaction to that inflation number. The Dow down 70 points today at 34,575. The S&P 500 at 5.5. And the NASDAQ up 40 at 13,813. We did see the price of oil hit a new high for the year in New York, close to $89 a barrel at Southern California gas pumps. You're noticing the difference already, with regular now averaging $5.58 a gallon, $5.92 the average price for premium, and $6.21 now the average price for diesel. I'll be back again tomorrow evening in the 5 o'clock hour right here. You can also bring up the Mottek on Money podcast on demand and listen to my interview with Dr. Mohamed EL-ERIAN if you missed it earlier. This is Mottek on Money on 790 KBC.
It could be information to change your life forever. Or the Something You Should Know podcast could just be something interesting.
My guest is Kim Zachman. She is author of the book There's No Cream in Cream Soda. I don't think I've ever really known the story of why they're called hot dogs.
There is so many legends about the name of the hot dog. When the Germans immigrants came over and they brought all of their sausages, they also brought their dachshunds. It really is because they kind of look like dachshunds.
Something You Should Know, wherever you listen.